The road stretched endlessly before me, shrouded in an eerie silence that felt unnatural. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. The dim glow of my car's headlights illuminated the barren asphalt, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd somehow drifted into another world, a darker, more sinister one. Last summer, I decided to take a road trip to visit my high school friends in Berkeley. Normally, I'd fly, but this time, I wanted to explore the sights along the way. Parks, museums, and historical landmarks. The trip was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to break away from routine. But by the third night, I wished I had just booked a plane ticket. That evening, the road seemed to stretch forever, the endless blackness swallowing my little car whole. I'd been driving for hours, and exhaustion had set in. When I spotted a rest stop sign up ahead, I felt a wave of relief. My legs were stiff and my eyelids heavy. I needed a break. The rest stop was small, isolated, and unnervingly quiet. Its dim lighting flickered, casting long shadows across the lot. I pulled in and parked, the only car there. The silence felt oppressive, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. I stepped out, stretching my stiff limbs and letting the cool night air wake me up. Inside the rest stop, the faint hum of vending machines was the only sound. The hallway was empty, save for a janitor's closet, a rack of outdated magazines, and two restrooms. The kind of place you don't want to linger in for long. After using the restroom, I approached a vending machine for a Red Bull. As I fumbled with the coins, I heard the low growl of an engine. Turning toward the window, I saw another car pull into the lot, parking right next to mine. Out of all the empty spaces, why there? The unease crept in, but I brushed it off. I grabbed my drink, took a few sips, and tried to shake the feeling. 5 minutes passed. The car was still there, its headlights glaring like unblinking eyes. Was someone inside, watching me? I stepped outside, and just as I reached my car, the other car's engine shut off. My heart skipped a beat. The driver's door creaked open, and out stepped a tall man in a worn leather jacket. His face was shadowed, but his movements were deliberate, almost predatory. "Evening," I muttered, trying to sound casual as I walked toward my car. "Hey," he called after me. I froze. Slowly, I turned, only to find myself staring down the barrel of a pistol. My breath hitched, the world narrowing to the cold metal pointed at my face. "Wallet, phone, watch. Now," he barked, his voice calm but laced with menace. I obeyed without question, fumbling to hand over everything he asked for. My hands trembled as I placed the items in his outstretched palm. For a moment I thought it was over, that he'd take my things and leave. But then he motioned with the gun, jerking his head toward the dark forest behind the rest stop. "Walk." Panic surged through me. This wasn't a robbery anymore, it was something far worse. "Please," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Take the car. Just let me go." "Walk," he repeated, his tone sharp and final. The forest loomed ahead, its tangled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself forward, each step bringing me closer to what I was sure would be my end. "Stop," he commanded, after we'd gone about 20 feet into the trees. I turned to face him, trembling as he raised the gun once more. His eyes gleamed with a sick satisfaction, and I realized I was staring into the face of pure evil. "Kneel." Tears streamed down my face as I dropped to my knees, my body trembling uncontrollably. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the shot. The deafening sound of 3 gunshots shattered the night. Bang, bang, bang. I screamed, collapsing onto the ground in terror. My heart pounded, my ears ringing, but there was no pain, no blood, nothing. Tentatively, I opened my eyes. The man stood above me, laughing, a deep guttural sound that chilled me to the bone. "Go home, kid," he sneered, his grin wide and mocking, "and don't forget to wash your pants." Then, just like that, he turned and walked away, his laughter echoing through the trees. I lay there, paralyzed, too shocked to move. It took me a full minute to realize I was alive, that the gunshots had been blanks, a cruel, twisted joke at my expense. Eventually, I stumbled back to my car, my body shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't even bring myself to drive at first. I sat there gripping the wheel, tears streaming down my face. When I finally managed to start the engine, I didn't stop until I reached the next town, where I called the police and rented a room for the night. The man was never caught. To this day, I don't know if he's out there terrorizing someone else or if he's moved on to something even worse. What I do know is this: I'll never stop at a rest stop again. Not ever. It started with a nightmare before I even hit the road. A dark figure stood at the edge of a rain-soaked highway, staring at me with hollow eyes, its face hidden in the shadows. I jolted awake, my heart pounding, but I shook it off. Just another bad dream. My name is Dan. I've been a trucker for 25 years. You'd think I'd seen it all by now. But 4 years ago, I had an encounter that still haunts me. It was a rainy night, and I was hauling industrial supplies through a lonely stretch of highway. The clock on my dashboard read 4 a.m., and the road ahead was deserted. The rain came suddenly, pelting the windshield like a barrage of bullets. It was relentless, making the road slick and visibility near zero. I should have pulled over, but I didn't. The years behind the wheel had made me confident, maybe too confident. With 4 hours left to the company warehouse, I was eager to finish the trip and call it a day. But something felt off. It wasn't just the rain or the eerie silence of the deserted road. A gnawing unease crept over me, an inexplicable tension crawling under my skin. I tried shaking it off by fiddling with the radio, drowning the silence with some classic rock, but the feeling lingered. It was as if I wasn't alone. The fog grew thicker with every passing mile. I slowed down, my instincts on high alert, and that's when I saw it. Headlights piercing through the haze, barreling toward me at breakneck speed. "Are they insane?" I muttered, gripping the wheel. The car was coming straight at me. I honked, flashed my lights, and swerved to avoid a head-on collision. But the rain betrayed me. The tires lost grip, and my truck jackknifed. Everything happened in a heartbeat. The weightlessness as the truck tipped, the deafening crash as it hit the ground, and the gut-wrenching sound of metal grinding against asphalt. Then silence. When I came to, I was lying on the cold, wet ground. Pain radiated through my body, but it was the eerie quiet that struck me most. No rain, no wind, no sound, just silence. I tried to move but couldn't. My legs wouldn't respond. I gasped for help, but my voice was barely a whisper. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching against the gravel. Relief washed over me, thinking someone had stopped to help. But as the sound grew closer, dread crept in. Something about the way those footsteps echoed felt wrong. And then, out of the darkness, they appeared. An older man and a younger one, their faces lit by the glow of their flashlight. "We saw the crash," the older man said, his voice steady. Relief surged through me as they called for an ambulance, staying by my side until it arrived. The hospital became my second prison. Weeks passed as I recovered from broken bones, internal bleeding, and a head injury. I thought the worst was behind me, until the nights brought something far worse. At first I dismissed it as a side effect of the trauma, but each night I felt it. Eyes on me, watching from the shadows. One night, I woke to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. Tall and dark, its silhouette was unnaturally still. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to scream, to move, but I was frozen. The figure stepped closer. I could feel its icy breath on my face, hear its faint whispers. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. Then it vanished. The nurses chalked it up to sleep paralysis, a symptom of my injuries and stress. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a hallucination. The figure began to visit more frequently, sometimes in the dead of night, other times in broad daylight. Its presence was suffocating. Desperation drove me to research the highway where my accident happened. What I found sent chills down my spine. That stretch of road was infamous. Dozens of accidents, eerily similar to mine, had occurred there. Survivors spoke of ghostly headlights, phantom cars, and a figure standing in the middle of the road. The pieces fell into place. The figure that haunted me was the same one responsible for my crash. But why? I remembered William. the man who'd saved me that night. When I called him, he confirmed my suspicions. There had been no car on the road that night. From his vantage point behind my truck, he'd seen me swerve violently, for no reason at all. That night, the figure appeared again. This time, it didn't just stand at the foot of my bed. It whispered. Its voice was a low, mournful rasp, recounting a story of tragedy. Decades ago, it said, it had been a trucker too. On a stormy night like mine, a drunk driver had veered into its path. The crash was fatal for both. I wanted to ask why it targeted me, but before I could, a nurse entered the room, and the figure disappeared. The next day, I found an old news article confirming the figure's story. A fatal crash on that very highway, 35 years ago. But what the article didn't mention was the ghostly presence of the drunk driver now haunting the road, replaying its fatal mistake. I realized both souls were trapped, reliving their tragedy. They weren't evil. They were lost. Since then, I've prayed for them, hoping they find peace. But even now, when I drive that highway, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. The figure may be gone, but its story lingers. A haunting reminder of lives lost and roads cursed. The forest whispered that night. A low, mournful sound that crept through the trees like a warning. I hadn't noticed it at first, the strange hum beneath the rumble of my old cargo truck. But now, I can't forget it. My name's Eloyi, and I swear what happened to me in August 2008 is the kind of nightmare you can't wake up from. It was one of those suffocating summer nights, the heat clinging to the air like a second skin. I was driving down Highway 60, a stretch of road cutting through the Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri. By then, I'd spent over 2 decades behind the wheel, hauling steel sheets this time for a construction site further south. Nothing out there surprised me anymore, or so I thought. The forest during the day was all sunlight and charm, but by night it became something else entirely. Shadows seemed to crawl across the asphalt, twisting into shapes the headlights couldn't chase away. I was heading toward a truck stop near Springfield, looking forward to a quick bite and some rest, when I spotted it. An old, battered truck stranded on the shoulder, with its hood gaping open. A man was standing beside it, waving both arms frantically. His silhouette was desperate, almost frantic against the fading light. I hesitated for a second, my gut tightening with unease. But truckers have an unspoken rule. We help each other. With a sigh, I pulled over ahead of him and grabbed my flashlight. The man introduced himself as Neil, mid-40s, round-faced, wearing a grease-stained baseball flannel that might have once been white. He looked worn out, and his story matched his appearance. His truck, he said, had a busted alternator, and he'd been stuck there for hours. He asked if I could give him a lift to the next town, about 20 miles away, so he could find a mechanic in the morning. He seemed harmless enough, and I didn't have the heart to leave him stranded. After grabbing a small duffel bag, Neil climbed into my passenger seat, and we hit the road. Neil was chatty, filling the silence with stories about being from Alabama and his truck's recent troubles. But about 15 minutes into the drive, the conversation stopped dead. 2 sets of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. Cars coming fast and following too close for comfort. At first I thought they were impatient drivers, but they didn't pass. They just lingered, tailing us like predators stalking prey. "Do you know them?" I asked Neil, nodding toward the mirror. He turned to look, his face pale under the dim cab lights. "No, never seen him before," he said, but his voice wavered. A nervous chuckle escaped me. "You sure you're not running from someone?" Neil tried to laugh, but it came out strained. Neither of us joked after that. For the next 10 miles, the cars followed without making a move to overtake us. Just when I thought my nerves couldn't take it anymore, the headlights surged forward. Both cars sped up and swerved in front of us, screeching to a halt and blocking the road. I slammed on the brakes, my truck groaning under the sudden stop. "What the hell?" I muttered, but my blood turned cold as 3 men climbed out of the cars, each holding a gun. Neil looked like he was about to faint, sweat pouring down his face. "Stay calm," I whispered, though I was shaking just as badly. The men surrounded the truck, barking orders for us to get out. There was no point in resisting. We climbed out, hands raised. Neil stumbled, nearly collapsing onto the asphalt as they herded us to the side of the road. "Empty your pockets," one growled, his weapon never wavering. We handed over everything: wallets, phones, truck keys. My mouth was dry as I tried to reason with them. "Take whatever you want, just let us go." "Shut up," snapped the leader, his eyes cold and lifeless. To my shock, he tossed the truck keys back at me. "Get in and drive. Your friend's coming with us." "No," Neil whispered, his voice barely audible. One of the men shoved him toward the car, while another jabbed his gun in my direction, signaling me to move. Helpless, I climbed back into the cab, glancing at Neil as he was forced into the back seat of one of the cars. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't fight back, not without risking both our lives. They led us off the highway, down a narrow dirt road that twisted deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, their gnarled branches clawing at the truck like skeletal fingers. I didn't know where they were taking us, but I knew it wasn't anywhere good. The convoy stopped in a small clearing, the kind of place that didn't feel like it belonged on any map. They ordered me out of the truck, forcing both of us toward an old, rotting cabin. The place reeked of decay, its windows shattered and walls sagging as if the forest itself was trying to swallow it whole. "Sit," the leader barked, shoving us onto a filthy, broken couch. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The men just laughed, low and guttural. One of them, the stocky one with a cruel grin, leaned in close. "Don't go running to the cops now." With that, they tied us up, their laughter echoing as they walked out and slammed the door. Neil was trembling beside me, his voice barely a whisper. "They're going to kill us, aren't they?" "Not if we get out of here," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. I worked at the ropes binding my wrists, the coarse fibers cutting into my skin. Outside, the forest fell eerily silent, the kind of quiet that felt like it was waiting for something. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to free myself and untied Neil. We stumbled out of the cabin into the suffocating darkness, the moonlight barely piercing through the canopy above. The cars were gone, and so was my truck, but the forest wasn't empty. Somewhere in the distance, a low, guttural sound rumbled through the trees, something not human. Neil froze, his eyes wide with terror. "Run," I whispered, and we did. We ran until our lungs burned, the shadows around us twisting into shapes I didn't dare look at too closely. When we finally reached the road, it felt like an illusion, too perfect against the chaos behind us. A single pair of headlights appeared in the distance, and for a moment I thought it was them. But as the car slowed, I saw an older man behind the wheel, his face lined with concern. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice a lifeline in the darkness. We climbed into his car, collapsing into the back seat. And as he drove us to the nearest sheriff's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly escaped. That something from that forest had followed us, still watching, still waiting. To this day, I hear the whispers of the Mark Twain National Forest, and I know I left more than my truck behind. It started as an ordinary night, like so many before. My name is Ernesto, and what I'm about to tell you is not just a story. It's the most terrifying experience of my life. Even now, the memories claw at the edges of my sanity. I used to work nights at an old ranch in the desolate outskirts of Arizona. It had been converted into a hotel, and while the job was easy, the commute home was a killer. An exhausting hour and a half of driving through the lonely, endless desert. Over time, I adjusted to the monotony. But one fateful night, something changed. I first noticed the taco truck parked near an RV park halfway through my drive home. For weeks, I ignored it, always in a rush to get back. But hunger has a way of slowing you down, and one night, with my stomach growling like a feral animal, I gave in. The tacos were incredible. So good, they didn't just satisfy me. They reeled me back night after night. Soon it became my routine. I'd pull up, order my tacos, and chat briefly with the man behind the counter. He was friendly, hardworking, and consistent. Oddly, I never got his name, but at the time it didn't seem to matter. Until that night. When I arrived, the truck was silent, its usual hum of activity absent. The lights were on, but the man was nowhere to be seen. Strange, I thought. Maybe he was taking a quick break. But as the minutes ticked by, a suffocating silence wrapped around me. There was no one on the road, no sign of life in the RV park, just me and the truck. Then I noticed the smell. Sharp, acrid, unmistakable. Something was burning. I called out, my voice echoing into the stillness, but there was no response. Smoke began curling from the grill, and my stomach twisted with unease. What could be left burning like that? Curiosity got the better of me. I walked up to the truck, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. The air felt heavier with each step. I hesitated before opening the door, a sick feeling crawling up my spine. Inside, the cash register was open, coins scattered across the counter. My first thought was robbery, but there were no signs of struggle, just an eerie stillness, like the truck itself was holding its breath. That's when I saw it. On the grill, blackened and grotesque, was the charred outline of a human hand. For a moment, my mind couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The stench of burnt flesh hit me and my stomach churned. The hand was perfectly formed, each finger frozen mid-reach, as if it had been seared in agony. I wanted to run, but I couldn't leave without turning off the grill. The truck felt suffocating, the air thick with smoke and dread. Forcing myself forward, I reached under the grill and turned off the gas, all the while avoiding another glance at that horrific sight. I bolted from the truck, slamming the door behind me, and called the police. My voice shook as I described what I'd seen, but the operator's calm questions felt detached, almost unreal. I told them everything, about the missing owner, the open register, and the hand. They said they'd send someone, but no one came. I waited for almost an hour, standing alone under the flickering light of a nearby lamppost. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, the darkness pressing against me. I kept glancing back at the truck, half expecting the man to appear, but he never did. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got in my car and drove home, my mind racing with questions. Who had done this? Where was the man who had served me tacos so many nights before? Over the following days, I scoured the news, searching for any mention of a robbery or a missing taco vendor, but there was nothing. The truck was gone when I passed by again, like it had been erased from existence. Even now, I wonder what really happened that night. Was the man taken, killed, or was something darker at play, something that defied explanation? All I know is I'll never forget the sight of that charred hand on the grill. It haunts me, a grim reminder of a night I wish I could erase. It started with a quiet road and ended with a nightmare I'll never forget. June 2018. I remember the date like it was yesterday. Back then, I decided to take an impromptu solo road trip. Something quick, something simple. A day to myself before the chaos of college life resumed in August. The plan was straightforward. Get up early, hit a few sightseeing spots, and start heading home by 9 p.m. No need for a hotel. It would be just me, the open road, and a playlist of my favorite tunes. The trip started without a hitch. I drove through scenic routes, ticked places off my bucket list, and even stopped to take some photos along the way. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt accomplished. Everything was perfect. But perfection doesn't last, does it? The trouble began on my way back. It was past 10 p.m. when I left the last spot, and the drive home was estimated at around 4.5 hours. The roads were dark, and the music playing softly from my speakers started to feel like background noise to the looming silence outside. By the halfway point, exhaustion began creeping in. My eyelids grew heavy, and even splashing water on my face from a canteen couldn't shake the haze. I knew I had to pull over. The next rest stop came into view like a beacon. It wasn't much, just a small building lit by flickering overhead lights. The parking lot was eerily empty, which wasn't surprising given how late it was. Still, the stillness of the place gnawed at my nerves. Shrugging it off, I parked, leaned back in my seat, and set an alarm for a quick hour-long nap. When the alarm blared, I woke groggy but determined to finish the drive. My bladder had other plans. I sighed, grabbed my keys, and headed inside to use the restroom. The inside of the building was just as deserted as the parking lot, and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Finding the restroom, I pushed open the door and stepped into one of the stalls. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the world outside had paused. Then I heard it. Faint voices in the hallway. At first I dismissed it. Maybe my tired mind was playing tricks on me. But the voices grew louder, clearer, until the restroom door creaked open. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, listening. The parking lot had been empty. My car was the only one there, so who else was here? I held my breath, peering through the narrow crack of the stall. A shadow moved past the sinks. I was ready to brush it off, chalking it up to a harmless traveler. That's when a soft knock rattled the stall door. "There's someone in here," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. Then slowly, an eye appeared at the crack in the door. My stomach dropped. The eye stared at me, unblinking, wide with something I couldn't name. Madness, hunger, or maybe both. Before I could react, the man started screaming. The sound wasn't human. It was raw, guttural, and filled with rage. His fists pounded against the stall door with a force that shook the hinges. Panic took over. I threw myself against the door, trying to keep him out, but he didn't stop. He slammed his head against the metal again and again, each impact sounding like a gunshot in the small tiled room. I knew the door wouldn't hold for long. With a burst of adrenaline, I flung the stall door open, slamming it into him. He stumbled backwards, giving me just enough time to bolt past him. I ran, heart pounding, barely registering the cold air as I burst out of the restroom and into the parking lot. But he wasn't far behind. The sound of the building's front door slamming open made me whip around. He was chasing me. His feet pounded against the pavement, his wild screams echoing in the night. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and managed to start the engine just as he lunged at my door. His body slammed against the side of the car, but I didn't stop. I threw it into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, I saw him. He was standing there, completely still, staring after me. And then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too wide, too unnatural, as if his face didn't quite know how to form the expression. My foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, and I didn't let up until the rest stop disappeared into the night. For the rest of the drive, I couldn't shake the image of his eyes or the sound of his screams. Sleep was out of the question. I was running on pure adrenaline, speeding down the highway with trembling hands gripping the wheel. I don't know who or what he was. A deranged homeless man, a twisted predator, or something else entirely. I'll never know. But I've never stopped at a rest stop again, and I never will.